Picture this, you open your banking app late at night. You're expecting the usual stress. Maybe you're wondering whether your paycheck will stretch far enough. Maybe you're mentally calculating bills before the money even arrives. But tonight feels different. For the first time in your life, your savings account shows $20,000. And for a few seconds, you just stare at it. Not because $20,000 makes you rich, it doesn't. But because for the first time in a very long time, your life stops feeling fragile. You stop feeling one car repair away from panic, one surprise bill away from starting over, one bad month away from disaster. And if you've ever lived paycheck to paycheck, you know exactly what that feeling is worth. You sleep better, you think clearer, you breathe easier. But here's what most people never see coming. The biggest danger isn't getting to $20,000, it's what happens after. Because statistically, building savings is hard, keeping it is often harder, and every year, thousands of people spend years climbing toward financial stability only to quietly slide backward once they finally get there. Today we're talking about why your first $20,000 changes your life more than most people realize, the psychological traps that show up afterward, and why this milestone has almost nothing to do with looking rich and everything to do with becoming free. I'm Frugal Fred, and on this channel we talk about personal finance that actually works in real life. No fake guru nonsense, no flex culture, no promises that you'll retire at 30 if you skip enough lattes. Just practical money habits, smarter decisions, and simple systems that help normal people build financial peace. So if that sounds useful, hit subscribe. Now let's talk about why this number matters so much, because the answer has nothing to do with the number itself. According to Federal Reserve survey data, roughly 37% of American adults couldn't cover a $400 emergency from savings alone without borrowing money or selling something. Think about that for a second. Nearly 4 out of every 10 adults are one unexpected expense away from financial stress. A blown tire, a medical bill, a broken appliance. That's all it takes. So when someone reaches $20,000 in savings, they're not just hitting a milestone, they're entering a completely different financial reality. But here's where things get interesting. The moment you build a meaningful amount of savings, the world starts treating you differently. Your bank suddenly wants to upgrade your credit card, investment apps start pushing advanced features, luxury brands start looking a little more reasonable, and social media begins feeding you a non-stop stream of people your age living lives that seem bigger, shinier, and more expensive than yours. The world has a funny way of congratulating you for saving money by encouraging you to spend it, and that's where the real danger starts. Because your brain whispers something that sounds perfectly reasonable. You earned this. Now don't get me wrong, sometimes you did earn it. The problem is what often comes next. A friend of mine spent years aggressively paying off debt and building an emergency fund. When he finally crossed $20,000, he felt incredible, and honestly, he should have. He'd worked hard for it, but within 18 months, he upgraded his apartment, financed a newer truck, added several subscriptions, and started spending a little more freely because, in his words, I finally had room. None of those decisions looked reckless individually. That's what makes lifestyle inflation dangerous. It rarely arrives as one catastrophic mistake. It shows up as dozens of reasonable decisions. One upgrade here, one monthly payment there, one reward purchase after another. And before long, the financial stress you escaped starts quietly returning. The strange part, most people don't realize they're moving backward until months later, and that's why the biggest benefit of reaching $20,000 isn't the money itself, it's what happens inside your head. Before you build savings, almost everything feels urgent. Car repair, emergency, unexpected bill, emergency, bad boss, can't leave. You become trapped in survival mode, and when you're in survival mode, long-term thinking becomes almost impossible. You're focused on getting through this week, this month, the next paycheck. Not because you're irresponsible, because your brain is responding exactly how humans are wired to respond under pressure. But once you build a real financial buffer, something changes. You stop asking, how do I survive? And start asking, what do I actually want? That's a completely different question, and it creates a completely different life. Most people think financial freedom starts when you're rich. I don't think that's true. I think financial freedom starts the moment fear stops making every decision for you, and in a lot of cases, that shift begins somewhere around your first meaningful savings milestone. But there's another benefit that almost nobody talks about, and honestly, it might be the most valuable one of all, because once your money stops feeling fragile, schedule, your confidence starts changing too. And the benefit nobody expects? The way savings changes your career. When you're financially desperate, you negotiate from weakness. You tolerate things you shouldn't tolerate. Bad managers, underpayment, unreasonable demands. Not because you lack confidence, because losing the paycheck feels dangerous. Years ago, I remember talking to someone who absolutely hated his job. Every Sunday night felt miserable. Every Monday morning felt worse. He knew he was underpaid. He knew he should leave, but he had almost no savings, so every paycheck felt like oxygen. And when someone controls your oxygen, they have leverage. Fast forward a couple of years, he'd built a healthy emergency fund. Nothing crazy, just enough to cover several months of expenses. And suddenly he wasn't the same person. He negotiated for higher pay, started interviewing elsewhere, asked harder questions, stopped saying yes to everything. The job didn't change. His financial position did, and that's the hidden power of savings, not luxury, leverage. You're not rich. You simply have options, and options are incredibly valuable. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes people make is confusing wealth with income. They're not the same thing. There are people earning $180,000 a year who are financially trapped, and there are people earning half that amount who sleep peacefully every night. The difference usually isn't income, it's obligations. The first person has a giant mortgage, expensive vehicles, monthly payments everywhere, and a lifestyle that requires every dollar they earn. The second person built margin, and margin creates freedom. That's why the next mistake catches so many people off guard, because after reaching $20,000, people often mistake progress for permission. Permission to upgrade the apartment, permission to buy the nicer car, permission to increase spending because they're finally doing well. And here's what's fascinating. Most lifestyle inflation doesn't feel irresponsible. It feels deserved. That's what makes it dangerous. Nobody wakes up thinking, I'm going to destroy my finances today. Instead, they think, I've worked hard. I can afford this. Then 6 months later, they think it again and again and again until their expenses quietly consume every bit of progress they made. There's a concept I wish more people understood. Your savings should not be treated like a trophy. It should be treated like a floor you refuse to fall below, because wealthy people don't just focus on growing their ceiling, they protect their foundation. And once you understand that idea, everything starts making more sense. In fact, I think most people can simplify their finances into 3 layers. The first layer is your floor, your emergency fund, your stability, your life is on fire money. This money isn't exciting. It's not supposed to be. Its job is protection. The second layer is your growth engine. This is your long-term investing, the money quietly working in the background while you focus on living your life. No constant trading, no chasing headlines, no trying to outsmart the market every week, just steady, consistent investing over long periods of time. And then there's the third layer, the options layer. This is where life gets fun, travel, experiences, learning new skills, starting a business, taking a career risk, actually enjoying some of the money you've worked hard to earn. Because contrary to what some people online preach, the goal isn't to save every dollar forever. The goal is to build a life that feels both secure and enjoyable. And that's where many financial creators lose people. They accidentally make wealth building sound like punishment. Never spend, never relax, never enjoy anything. That's not sustainable. The people who succeed long term usually aren't the most extreme. They're the most consistent. They save, they invest, they enjoy life. Then they repeat the process for years. But there's one category where even smart people can sabotage all of that progress. And the scary part is most people don't realize how expensive it is until decades later. Let's talk about cars, because this next example completely changed the way I think about spending. A few years ago, I was looking at vehicles online and doing what most people do. I wasn't asking, can I afford this car? I was asking, can I afford the payment? And those are two very different questions, because a monthly payment has a way of making expensive decisions feel affordable. A few $100s here, a few $100s there. It doesn't sound like much until you realize those payments can follow you for 5, 6, or even 7 years. And that's where opportunity cost enters the picture. Imagine 2 people. One spends an extra $700 per month upgrading vehicles every few years. The other invests that same $700 consistently. Neither decision feels life-changing in a single month, but over 20 years, the gap can become hundreds of thousands of dollars. One person ends up with a driveway full of depreciated vehicles they've already replaced. The other ends up with a portfolio creating options. That's why wealthy people often look at purchases differently. They don't just ask, Can I afford this? They ask, what future freedom am I giving up for this? That single question can completely change the way you spend money. And once you start thinking that way, another temptation shows up: speed. Because eventually boring starts feeling boring. You save, you invest, you stay disciplined. Then one day you log in and realize progress is happening, but slower than you'd like. And that's exactly when the internet starts making dangerous promises. Suddenly you're seeing people who supposedly turned a few $100s into a fortune. Options trading, leverage, the latest crypto frenzy, the next guaranteed opportunity. And if you've spent years building savings, those shortcuts can become incredibly tempting, because the hardest part of wealth building isn't understanding what works, it's accepting how long it takes. I once knew someone who spent years carefully building savings, slowly, patiently, consistently. Then during a market craze, he became convinced he was being too conservative. Everyone online seemed to be getting rich faster, so he started chasing speculative investments. At first it worked, a few lucky wins, a little confidence. Then came bigger risks, bigger positions, and eventually one bad decision erased a huge portion of what had taken years to build. The painful part wasn't losing money, it was realizing he already had a system that was working. He just got impatient, and that's a trap that catches smart people all the time. Not because they're foolish, because they're human. Humans naturally want results faster. But wealth building has always been surprisingly boring. Consistent investing, reasonable spending, patience. That's not exciting enough for social media, but it has built more wealth than almost any shortcut ever invented, which is why protecting your floor matters so much. Your floor should stay safe, your growth engine should stay boring, and if you want to speculate with a small amount of money you can genuinely afford to lose, that's your choice. Just don't confuse entertainment with a financial plan. Now let's compare two futures, because this is where everything we've talked about starts coming together. The first person reaches $20,000 and sees it as proof they've made it. They loosen up a little, upgrade a few things, increase a few monthly expenses. Nothing dramatic, nothing irresponsible, just slightly more spending in every direction. 5 years later, they're earning more money than ever, yet somehow they're still stressed, still dependent on every paycheck, still feeling trapped. Now look at the second person. They reach the same milestone, but they treat that money differently. They see it as a foundation, a line they refuse to cross. They continue investing, they enjoy life, they spend intentionally, but they never sacrifice stability to create the appearance of success. 5 years later, they aren't necessarily driving a nicer car or posting a more impressive lifestyle online, but something else has happened. They've built freedom, they can handle surprises, they can survive setbacks, they can make decisions from a position of strength rather than fear. And honestly, that's the lesson most people don't fully understand until much later. People think money buys stuff. What money really buys is options. The ability to say no, the ability to say yes, the ability to walk away, the ability to wait, the ability to breathe. That's why your first $20,000 matters so much. Not because of the number, because of what the number represents. Below a certain level, money feels like survival. Above it, if you protect it wisely, money starts becoming flexibility, choice, peace of mind, a future that's no longer controlled by emergencies. So here's the practical playbook. First, build your floor. Figure out what amount genuinely allows you to sleep at night. For many people, that's somewhere between 3 and 6 months of expenses. Second, build your growth engine. Keep it simple, diversified, consistent. The people who quietly become wealthy are rarely financial geniuses. They're usually just patient. Third, create your options layer. Enjoy some of your money, travel, learn new skills, have experiences, build a life worth living. And finally, become a little suspicious whenever the world suddenly starts trying harder to sell you things, because the moment you become financially stable, someone will try to convince you to spend that stability. Don't make their goals your goals. And if life knocks you backward for a while, don't treat it like failure. It happens. Cars break down, jobs disappear, emergencies show up. The people who eventually build wealth aren't the people who never get knocked down. They're the people who keep rebuilding. That's the real difference. And honestly, that's why your first $20,000 is such a powerful milestone. Not because it makes you rich, because it proves something. It proves you're capable of creating stability in a world that constantly pushes people toward financial anxiety. That changes how you think, how you work, how you make decisions, and eventually how you live. So I'm curious, What amount of money first made you feel financially safe? Was it $1,000, $10,000, $20,000, something else entirely? Drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear the answers. And if you enjoy personal finance content focused on real-world money psychology instead of hype, flexing, and get-rich-quick promises, consider subscribing. Protect your floor, protect your future, and I'll see you in the next one.